even know they're there. I have a friend of mine who worked on the base as a chief within the logistics branch. And for one of the first calls I made was to him and said, "Did you hear anything about this? Do you know anything about this?" Because we're really good friends. And I said, "No, man, I don't know anything about it." So he called his regimental sergeant major, and he said, "No, it didn't happen." Now, two things come to mind. Number one, if it did happen and it was done on the sly with only very senior staff knowing about it because the government insisted on it, it would be easy to disguise that. You could call these guys, from any country from that region of the world. You could say they were South Korean troops, and no one would know the difference, right? Because most people don't speak Korean. They certainly don't speak China, and no disrespect intended to Asians. It's hard, unless you're really familiar with two races. How do you tell Chinese from Malaysian or from South Korean? So my point is that it would have been easy to blend them in, have them do that, and then leave, and no one would have been the wiser. It's not outside the realm of possibility. Then you have the officers up at Canadian Forces Officers College in Toronto, 1- and 2-star generals. What the hell were they doing there? Then over in Kingston, what the hell were they doing there? And I think you're absolutely right. I wouldn't call it espionage, because espionage is something that takes place without the consent or knowledge of the host government. This was open and willing. This was not open, but willing participation by the Canadian government to allow access to the way that we do things in a military sense. And you know what that smacks of? Because China is not our friend.
Incompetence?
Oh, I was thinking much, much more serious than incompetence.
Well, I'm not going to go down the treason road, Nick.
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention treason either.
That's starting to get pretty. That's a pretty serious accusation. But
these are pretty serious allegations.
Well, yes. Well, incompetence, naivete. I don't know, but I want to go back to the when I called it an espionage operation. I don't believe that the government of Canada, even under this Prime Minister, it's hard for me to believe that he would condone actual spying on by our enemies on Canadian operations on a Canadian base. I could see him being gullible enough, and I could see officials in the government being gullible enough where they would accept the explanation that, we want to see how you guys operate in colder weather or in winter weather, because it could be, I don't know when these guys were over, but if they were over in the winter time and there was snow on the ground, that could qualify as colder weather, I guess, to people who aren't thinking very, very, and there's a lot of no thinking that goes on these days in government, or very naive and childish thinking. But I could see the Chinese taking the opportunity, saying, well, here, we can have 6 or 7 people stationed here, embedded with Canadian troops for a week or 2 weeks or for 6 weeks or whatever. And we'll learn a few things. We'll learn a little bit about what they're doing in terms of training, how their operational procedures and protocols. We'll learn a little bit about their communications, which is always an important thing. We may even find opportunities to rub shoulders with some American troops who might very well be on exchange or whatever. Although it's hard for me to believe that American troops who might be here in some sort of an exchange capacity, who are running into People's Liberation Army personnel in Petawawa, wouldn't themselves raise a few eyebrows and maybe raise a bit of an alarm as well. So I still think that the best explanation for something like this from a Chinese point of view is some kind of an espionage or intelligence gathering operation that our civilian our masters or the civilian controllers of the in the ministry authorized in being very naive. And certainly something must have been going on, or there must be more to this story in terms of substance or accuracy, Nick, because if there wasn't, then why would the CDS, the Chief of the Defense Staff, step in the minute he finds out about it and terminate the program and send those guys packing? On his own initiative, no less. There has to be something. I think we're not getting to the bottom of it yet, but I think this is an explosive story, and I think that's the direction that we have to be moving towards. Is this is some sort of a Chinese operation that our gullible and unwitting government allowed to unfold and develop. And over to you, Nick.
You very well don't know I have. You may very well be right. And as the old saying goes, never assigned a conspiracy that can be explained by stupidity. But, and I'm story to be true. I would rather it be incompetence that can be corrected instead of finding out we're nothing but a satellite state for a regime that cares nothing about human rights, nothing about Canadian values, isn't interested in anything we have to say as far as conduct on the world stage is concerned. I don't want that to be the case. The evidence before us is making it very hard not to come to that conclusion. Because if it is incompetence, then the government needs to step down en masse and resign. If it isn't incompetence, now you've got a whole nother kettle of fish, and that brings to I don't want to go to that topic, but sooner or later, it's the only option left, because how else do you explain it? And I want this to be wrong. I want this. Somebody will say, no, that didn't happen, or no, what you don't understand is, and all of a sudden everybody goes, oh, okay, now it makes sense. We were spying on them, not the other way around. Okay, or something. That's what I want to happen. I'm just not convinced it will.
Well, certainly this government is not going to resign because of this particular situation. It's not. Here's the other interesting thing, Nick, and that is that, the timing of this in terms of getting to the truth and trying to create some sort of momentum towards holding the government accountable is that it appears that tomorrow the House is going to rise. The House of Commons is going to rise for its annual Christmas break, and they won't be back until mid-January, so you won't have any committee meetings, and you won't have the House of Commons sitting. And who knows how much attention the mainstream media is going to pay to this. Although I suspect they will to a certain degree. So I think this has legs in the vernacular, and I'd like to see how far it goes for sure. But it's extremely troubling as we've already pointed out, Nick. So yeah, kudos to Ezra too. I have to say this that Ezra's. I don't know. I've known Ezra personally for many years, and I wouldn't say we were best buds, but we're not, antagonistic towards one another by any stretch of the imagination. Well, we wouldn't be anyway because we're both Jewish. So, but
it was a joke.
I know. Yeah, Nick. I forgot. Nick's mic was off there for a second when he made a joke about us not being on the one another's Christmas card list. But anyway, look, we're Ezra's. I consider Ezra to be a friend, but he can jump the gun sometimes, and I think he'd be the first person to admit that. And he's not above. I remember a number of years ago when he was working in communications on Parliament Hill in the opposition leader's office, and I also was working in communications, and he was the director, and they came to me and asked me to write a speech for the leader for a conference he was attending on a particular issue, and I won't get into the details except to say that I thought, just for the fun of it, I'm going to write a really inflammatory speech. I thought to myself, I'm going to write a barn burner that the media is going to jump all over, and I don't care. And I thought to myself, I don't care, because I'm going to kick it upstairs to Ezra, who was the director of communications at the time, and Ezra and some of the other people out there. They're going to tone it down a little bit. They'll balance things out, and everything will be okay. So I wrote this barn burner speech. I mean, this was a flamethrower of a speech. Sent it up to Ezra, and an hour later I get an email back congratulating me on it, and but criticizing me, saying we have to ratchet it up a little bit more. And
ratchet it up,
which by the way he did. So this is Ezra. The point I'm making here is, he's not afraid to throw fire on a lit match. He's not afraid to throw gasoline on a lit match. Some people, the saying would go is that they would throw a lit match into a pail of gasoline. Ezra is more the kind of guy that would look at somebody with a lit match and say, if there was a reason for it, he's not going to just do it gratuitously, but he's not afraid to take a pail of gasoline and throw it at the guy with the lit match. So that's kind of his modus operandi. So I take sometimes when he's coming out with a large statement with a little bit of a grain of salt, and I go, wow, man, is that Ezra, throwing gasoline on the fire? And but in this case, I don't think it is. And the point I'm making here again is, this may be a backhanded or roundabout way of saying kudos to Ezra Levant and Rebel Media for digging this story up, even if it was inadvertently. But I think, you have to give credit where it's due. Nick, we're just coming up to the end of the first segment. So we might as well just go ahead for our first break here. So we'll be back in a few minutes if you're listening to the show live. And if you're listening to the podcast, that's the end of part one. And part two for this week's podcast will be posted online tomorrow morning. That's Friday morning. So we'll be back again here on the Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca.